Dominik Kubalik, 5 games straight now with a goal. Yeah, 5 straight games with a goal. He's been the most added player on Yahoo for the past 2 days. And just take a look at this. I mean, actually, yesterday was different. It was actually Sandin yesterday, which is a whole other story. We'll get to Sandin another day. There's so much I have to say on him, too. He looks fantastic, but it's way too early. But look at Dominik Kubalik, 6,356 ads. Yesterday, the day before, I believe it was like 7,000. And then today, he's sitting at 5,009, a huge number above Rasmus Sandin. So Dominik Kubalik has a lot of hype around him. People are obviously very excited. I mean, reasonably so. He's been killing. He's been on that top line. A lot of things actually look really, really good. And when you watch the games and when you check out a lot of the charts, charting hockey, different places, he's been one of their best skaters, if not the best skater for a stretch here. So it's not crazy that he's getting more opportunities. And there's not a lot to know about Kubalik from the past, right? We don't have much point of reference, so we can only go off of what was he doing all season, and then what has changed recently with Dominik Kubalik to make him this absolute just force of nature that he's become with these 5 goals in 5 straight games. So let's take a look at what Dominik Kubalik is doing, because it's absolutely insane. So if we look at the last 3 game lines, they've actually been playing Dominik Kubalik with Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews 12% of the time. So that's where he's kind of been. The other place he's played on is he's always been with Toews. That's who he's always with. His rock is Jonathan Toews. That's where he's always playing. But sometimes there'll be John Quenneville, as you can see here. Sometimes it'll be Patty Kane. It kind of changes up, because if you go to Daily Faceoff, right now, they have Kubalik, Toews, and Kajula as the top line. But if you look at the game from yesterday, that really didn't happen much. It ended up being Kane being moved up and playing with Toews and Kubalik. And it actually worked pretty well. And it obviously worked for Kubalik. So last night, Kubalik got 9 shots on goal and, of course, had a massive game. But there are some things, there's good, there's some very, very good for Dominik Kubalik. And there's also some kind of more alarming things that make me question a little bit how long this is going to last. I think the best comparable I can think of right now to Dominik Kubalik is Jakub Vrana when he was going off. Remember when Jakub Vrana was just killing it? And largely it was because shots went up like crazy. His shots per 60 was wildly inflated, and he was relying a lot on goals. In the case of Dominik Kubalik on the season, he's on a 51-point pace so far. And this is kind of nuts too. 64% of his points are coming from goals. Yeah, so just preface this whole thing. So remember, when you're thinking of Dominik Kubalik and you pick him up and you're wondering, is he long-term or short-term? The big thing here, too, to remember with Dominik Kubalik is that a lot of his points, the majority of his points are coming on goals. And so what we need to take a very hard look at is, are those goals sustainable? Of course, we might think that his IPP can come up or his assists can come up, right? You would like to see more assists, and maybe that balances out a little bit. But it doesn't seem to be the case, because this has been a thing all season. And around 55% of Dominik Kubalik's points have come in the last 13 games alone. And so this has just been a ridiculous tear for him. So what's going on? What has changed? What is new? Of course, there's the new deployment of Jonathan Toews and getting a few better minutes with better line mates, pretty much. His minutes haven't deviated that much. Before this, he was playing around 13 and a half minutes a game on average. And in this last stretch, over the last 13 days, it's been 15 minutes of average time on ice. In the last 6 games, it's 15 and a half minutes of average time on ice. And then if you go all the way to the last 7 days, it's 16 minutes of average time on ice. Last night, he got around 17. It wasn't the first time he had gotten 17, though, so I wouldn't be surprised if that goes back down to 15 in the game after that. Now, one of the reasons, I think at least, but when I dig in a little bit, I'm just going to do this first here, but one of the things that I notice with Dominik Kubalik is that when you look at his offensive zone starts, they're ridiculously high. They're in the 80s, right? And so he gets very high offensive deployment. So why last night, for example, did he play 17 minutes? Well, they were in a very tight game and needed offense. And so in that scenario, you're going to play your best offensive player, which happens to be right now Dominik Kubalik. And of course, that's why they moved Patrick Kane up there, right? And he gets more minutes because it's a close game and you're trying to score. And so Dominik Kubalik ends up getting more minutes there. Now, in games where they're already leading or they need a little bit more defense, they need to be a little safer. In that case, Dominik Kubalik gets a few less minutes. So that's what I see kind of why he's stuck in around the 15. They're using him as a largely offensive player. And so when it comes to those defensive minutes, he just doesn't get those opportunities because they don't necessarily trust him yet on defense, it seems. Largely on defense, right? Kind of like Patty Kane. You know he's great on offense, but he kind of hurts you a little bit on defense. So then when you take a look at what's going on, so like I said, 64% of his goals or his points are goals. And so let's take a look at shots. So his shots have come up a ton recently. On the whole season, his average is 190, but when you look at his last 13 games, it's 221, and it just keeps going up as you get sooner and sooner to now. And so in the last 14 days, the last 6 games, he is on a 301 shot pace. Over the last 7 days, or his last 3 games, he's on a 383 shot pace. Yeah, that's insane. I'm telling you, it's like I'm looking at Jakub Vrana all over again. Although I do like Kubalik more than Vrana. But then the shooting percentage is really what gets me here. The shooting percentage is just the thing that can't continue. It's not going to. 28.5% shooting over the last 13 games. Folks, that's insane. And you see, the thing is, if someone were shooting low, let's say someone were getting low minutes, right? And their shooting volume just wasn't there. And you say, okay, well, maybe they're just a good sniper and they're going to start to take more shots. And in that case, you say, well, okay, I can maybe forgive this high shooting percentage because it's going to come down as the minutes come up and the shots also start to come up. But the thing is, with Dominik Kubalik, his shots are already probably as high as they're going to get. His shots per 60 over the last 7 days is 17.4. Over the last 13 days, 10.6. The 10.6 is a little bit more reasonable, but still, that's probably the limit for Dominik Kubalik. That's probably what you're looking at, is that's where he's going to be in shots, somewhere around there. That's what you can expect. Let's say it goes up to 300 shot pace. Fine. But the thing is that then when you get into that point where he starts to increase in shots again, right, the 300 pace, the 383 pace over these last 7 14 days, his shooting percentage actually gets even higher. And that's something that you just don't see for a long term. Now, can it mean he's a great sniper? Absolutely. I'm not questioning his abilities. If you look at Charting Hockey, he's one of the best players, like I said, on the Chicago Blackhawks. But these 35, 32% shootings is just not going to continue. That's the big thing for me. And if you bring that down, if you look at his expected goals, actually, too, over the last 6 days, his expected goals is 3.5, and he's scored 7. So there you go. Cut that number right in half. He's still doing pretty damn well. His points pace over the last 6 games is 137 point pace. Pretty insane. But again, 70% of those points over that span are goals. And so as soon as you see the shooting percentage come back down to normal, and let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say it's 15 to 17%. Fine. That's still a reduction of half, more than half in shooting percentage. So you've seen a reduction of half the goals, which makes sense. That's as expected, right? So if you look at the expected, it kind of makes sense that, yeah, maybe he is a 15% shooter in this scenario, but the 30%, what you're seeing right now, is just not who he is at all. And I'll explain in a little bit what I actually expect him to kind of finish at. But let's go through a few more things here really quick. Another thing that is somewhat concerning to me to an extent is his IPP. It's very high at 83%. Now, some of that can be explained away by the fact that he's been their best player, right? And if you look at it from the perspective, he's been their best player, fine. The IPP, sort of, okay, 83%. I'll take it. Whatever. I'm not happy with it, but it's fine. I would expect him to be more of like a 70-ish% IPP guy, which he's 74% on average on the season. And that's, of course, including these inflated last few weeks. So I would say he's more of a 65 to 70% IPP guy, and that's more where I'd expect him to fall. And then the on-ice shooting percentage is, of course, another thing that is concerning, which is similar to his shooting percentage. He's benefiting a ton from on-ice shooting. And the thing is, and here's one thing that's a little concerning to me, is his on-ice shooting percentage is high, his IPP is high, and yet he's not getting many assists, right? So the Chicago Blackhawks are not scoring many goals when it's not Dominik Kubalik. That's while he's on the ice. That's what that's telling me. It's telling me, okay, the Blackhawks are scoring at a higher rate than they should when Kubalik is on the ice. He's involved in pretty much all of them, and yet he still doesn't have assists. So what happens when Kubalik doesn't score? Do other people clean it up? Why is nobody else scoring but Kubalik? Well, maybe it's because they're getting pretty lucky right now. And that's another area that maybe can improve, maybe. But I don't really see it because we know who the Blackhawks are this season for the most part. And they've had these stretches, right, where they go with these really insane shooting percentages and then kind of come back down. They're similar to Buffalo in that regard. So that's that's going to come down. That on-ice shooting percentage will come down as well. And so that's another area of reduction of points for him, unfortunately. And on top of that, he gets no power play. Now, again, you have to remember, this is not an indictment on his ability. He is good. But from a fantasy perspective, a lot of this is going to crumble at some point. That's just how it is. He gets no power play time. He only gets around 25% of the team's power play time. He's on that second unit with Alex Nylander. And of course, like I said, the offensive zone start percentage is fantastic. And it's not always a great measure to judge someone by this, but his on-ice save percentage has been pretty bad while he's been on the ice. Over the last 7 days, it's 88%. Over the last 14 days, it's a terrible 85% on-ice save percentage. So on-ice save percentage is similar to IPP in that what is your goaltender save percentage while you're on the ice? You obviously want that to be closer to league average or above to indicate that you're somewhat of a better defense, or people, when you're on the ice, the team is better. It's not a great metric because it does involve a lot of things. How good are the defensemen that you play with? How good are the forwards that you play with? That kind of thing. But 85% is really, really low. And that's why I was saying before, he seems to be a largely offensive guy. They use him for offensive opportunities, which is good from a points perspective. But when you look at what are the possibilities of him getting more ice time and more trust and put out there more, it's hard to argue that he deserves it when his defensive woes are pretty bad. And that's kind of where Dominik Kubalik is at. He's kind of stuck in this 15 to 17 range. And it's going to be very hard to see him get out of that. And he doesn't really give any other peripherals aside from shots and the points, of course, that he's getting at the moment. So what's the story of Dominik Kubalik here for fantasy, and what should you do? Now, I think you should absolutely pick him up if he's available. I think he's a fantastic person to get, especially in the short term. I think he'll continue to play really, really well here in the short term. But I think that you need to adjust expectations. I don't think you should be trading for him or anything like that, assuming he's going to be a point per game player. I don't think it's going to happen because, of course, there's a lot of things here that are worrying. The fact that he's not getting assists and people around him are not scoring when he's not scoring means there's just not that many points for him to get in on. And so when you look at what is his point total when this all kind of crumbles, let's say, if it crumbles, then you're looking at probably like a 60-ish point guy, somewhere around there, maybe 70-ish, somewhere in there, because he is very, very over-indexed in many, many areas. And so he's a very good short-term streamer. And what you got to pay attention to with him is the same thing you pay attention to with Jakub Vrana back in the day when we were talking about him. You want to pay attention to his shots. If the shots start to come down and he's a majority goal scorer, then as soon as those shots come down, if they come down, maybe they won't, but if they do, that's one area that'll hurt him automatically because the shots just aren't coming, which means the goals won't come. Another thing to pay attention to, of course, is deployment. I think he's absolutely needs that deployment with Jonathan Toews up there on the top line. And you want to see his minutes stay up in the 15 to 17 range. That's one thing to watch as well. And just something to pay attention to, because I think a lot of times what we get the question of too is, well, when do I drop him? What's another indicator for how long the leash should be, right? So I gave you those. Another one to kind of pay attention to is what's happening with the team around him. Are they scoring more while he's on the ice? Because right now, for example, I would be extremely worried if that shooting percentage comes down. Like, my leash would pretty much be, as soon as he stops scoring, as soon as that shooting percentage goes down, he's dropped for me. Just because you look at that on-ice shooting percentage, I'm like, it's high, and yet he's not getting assists. So people, they're just not doing well while he's on the ice in general, right? As a team perspective, they're not doing that well. He himself is doing really well because he's scoring a lot of goals, but as a team, they're not really doing that hot. And so what I would actually prefer is I would prefer that on-ice shooting percentage to actually come down, but for him to get more assists. So get a little bit more sustainable in the on-ice shooting category. And that means probably more shots while he's on the ice, and have him get more involved as assists. That's just more sustainable for him. And so I want him to become a little bit more of an all-around player for him to really become a long-term ad. Now, is he a short-term ad? Absolutely. Yes. Would I be trading for him? No. In no way I would be trading for him right now. It's just the absolute wrong time. You're going to be overpaying. And the truth of the matter is we don't have that much to go off of when it comes to Dominik Kubalik. A lot has changed in these past few weeks. And so if you're going to trade for him, you're in a tough spot because you don't actually know how much to pay. And I think a lot of times, too, people misunderstand when I'm saying that a guy is unsustainable, that I'm saying they're terrible, there's no point to pick them up or anything like that. No, it's really just a warning. What I'm trying to do here is just warn and give you a heads up that, look, these are the things I'm looking at that I'm saying, I don't know if that's going to stick. But you know what? He's worth having in the meantime. He's worth holding on to. But Yeah, he's just a not a long leash kind of guy, and someone that at some point here you're probably going to want to drop, just because those goals will most likely fall off, and the shots per 60 are kind of insane, and the on a shooting percentage is high. There's a lot of things, but guess what? He's killing it right now. And quite frankly, in fantasy, that's sort of all that matters sometimes is the guy that's killing it right now. For example, Jared McCann is another one that I really like in the short term, but if that deployment falls off, he's not worth it anymore. So you got to play your wire smart. You've got to play your streamer smart. And in the case of Dominik Kubalik, he's a very, very smart waiver play, and you'd be even smarter to probably give him a pretty short leash here. Thanks for watching this episode of the Fantasy Hockey Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. We put out videos all the time, and we just want to help you win. Speaking of videos, you might want to check out these cool ones right over here.